Welcome to Create with Copper. I'm Teresa, and in this video I want to go back to basics to explore the wirework corset weave. As far as I can tell, there's no agreed list of weave names, so I've settled for corset weave as it has a similar look to the lacing of a corset. I use it a lot with two wires spaced apart, but you can weave it with the wires together. For me, the defining element is that the weaving wire will pass down between the frame wires when crossing between them. I'll show you what I mean as we get started. So to start the basic corset weave, I've got two 1mm frame wires here. And I'm just going to attach some 0.4 on one of the wires, just with a few wraps. You can undo the wraps again later on, it's just to secure it at the moment. And then if I take the other wire, I'm just going to hold it at a small distance apart. I'm going to try for about 0.5 centimetre apart. And the weaving wire is already down between them, so I'm just going to go a full wrap around that second wire and then down between the wires and back across to the first wire. I'm then going to take a full wrap around that first wire, over again, and then between the wires to go over to the second wire. Now the reason for having one full wrap around the wire is that it will hold them apart. If you didn't do that, then they could actually move closer together again. And this is what I'm calling kind of two wraps around each wire. As you'll see, it's creating quite a dense weave between the wires. Now you can go around the wires any amount of times you want, so if we up it to 3 wraps around each wire, then we can see that the spacing as the wires cross start opening out a bit. And if I continue to do this with 4 wraps around each wire, 5 and then 6 wraps around each wire, you should be able to see that there's quite a difference in the effect that you get. So you can vary the number of wraps to create the design you want. I use corset weave in an increasing gap quite a lot for bales and to add interest to a piece. So for this test piece I've attached my weaving wire. I'm just going to place the second frame wire right next to the first and then splay those wires out for the increasing gap that I'm going to weave. This you can adjust as you go along depending on how wide you want to make it. So now I'm just going to go round that second wire twice, and then I'm actually going to weave this with 3 wraps around each wire. So we'll take it 3 wraps around the bottom wire, down between the 2 wires, and then 3 wraps around the second wire. And I'm just going to continue with the 3 wraps just to show you how that design looks. Now I have had a few positive comments about seeing somebody weaving left-handed. Thanks guys, I'm glad you're enjoying the videos. I'm not actually left-handed, but I do have wrist problems in my right wrist, so I tend to do most of my weaving this way. It doesn't really matter which hand you use, so it's worth experimenting to find which one's most comfortable. Probably more important is where you can, keeping the front of the piece uppermost so you can see exactly how it's going to look when you finish. Now I've woven that a fair way, and you might be able to see as the gap gets wider, those weaves between the 2 frame wires do start looking a little more dense. It is quite subtle, but you could adjust the wraps on each wire to compensate for that, or change the design completely depending on how you want it to look. Now this might stretch the definition of corset weave a bit. It's not going to look like the lacing of a corset, but I just wanted to show you how the same weave looked when the wires were directly next to each other. So I'm just going to use that test piece we've just done and turn it around, and I'll flip it over just so we've got consistency of where the wire's going. Now we've just completed 2 wraps on the bottom wire, so I'm just going to take that weaving wire up around the top wire once, and then around down between the wires and across to the bottom wire. And I'm just going to do 2 wraps on each wire. And as you might be able to see, even if you then push all of that weaving as close together as you can, there will be gaps on the frame wires. Now it's not too obvious, so you can get away with it as kind of a consistent looking wrap. If you increase the wraps on each wire to 3 wraps, you'll see that those gaps start getting more obvious where you've got some bare wire between, but that could be a design element in itself. Now the final thing I want to show in this video is how to use the corset weave around a curve. And let's use the test piece that we started with and start to bend those frame wires into the curve that you want. Now to keep them where you want, you can hammer this, or you can curve it as you go along, in which case you can just make sure the start of the curve is fine. Just makes it a little bit easier to weave. So I'm then going to take just 2 wraps around that inside wire, which is the top wire here. And then go over and take several wraps on the other wire. There really isn't an exact science on the number of wraps. It just depends what kind of looks right. Basically, if you can identify where the imaginary centre of the curve is, you can then make sure that the weaving wire is kind of radiating out from that, kind of like spokes of a wheel. And just keep working your way around the curve, and you can adjust the number of wraps as you go if you want to, just to create the curve that you want. Well, I think that covers the basics. There are many variations, including using more than 2 frame wires, and what I've called the ladder weave that I used in the moiré ring. But once you know the basics, you can start experimenting and creating such variations. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please press the like button below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and head over to my website for more hints, tips and projects. Have fun weaving, and I'll see you soon.